Hello and welcome to another edition of ABC, Angie's Book Club. The book I am focusing on today is called Promise, and it is by Rachel Eliza Griffiths, who is with me. I'm going to call you Eliza.
Yes, please.
Because that's the name you go by, but it's good to have you here.
It's so wonderful to be here with you, Angie. I am thrilled beyond.
Oh, stop that now. Okay, first things first. Rachel Eliza Griffiths, but you go by the name Eliza. When did Eliza kick in?
You know, I think Eliza kicked in maybe when I was around grad school time. But actually the name Eliza, when I was younger, my mother would call me Eliza. And when she passed away, I started to use Eliza more because I thought I still want to hear that. And then other people can call it and I can kind of hear an echo of my mother there. But, you know, if people say Rachel or Rachel Eliza, it's all love.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that keeping the Eliza keeps that connection with your mum because she called you Eliza. Okay.
Yes.
Eliza, first off, I'm wondering where you got the passion, the energy to write such a moving book, because it's not just stories, it's experiences, it's characters, it's food, it's music set around the time of civil rights, when I'm sure you weren't even born.
No, I wasn't.
So where did this come from?
This time has always fascinated me. I mean, speaking about my mother, what I can say is that she was born in 1954, which is literally officially kind of the birth of the civil rights movement. And when I wrote the book, I wanted to think about the time that she was born and being a Black girl and what that world would have looked like. But this particular time for me, you have in America, the music that Black people are making, coming from the church, spirituals, the juke joint, you know, the Supremes are coming, Motown is coming, all of these things are colliding. And then the food, of course, we can go back to, you know, enslaved days and the imagination of Black people with food, what they were doing and making things really specific, soul food. That's always interested me. And I'm also a very good cook because my mama taught me. So this time for me felt kind of a peak of tensions and things happening in America. And, you know, we can talk later about how, you know, that's still very present and immediate now. But I would say that this time, because it's part of my birth story, I feel connected to it and have a lot of admiration for Black people being out on the front lines at that time and having finally the space and power and they always had it, but just going forward, sitting in at those counters, trying to integrate schools on every level in film and everything. Just Sidney Poitier, the films, you know, where you would see, it just all is very inspirational for me.
Going off book slightly, you mentioned the name Sidney Poitier. I'm also going to mention the name Harry Belafonte, two giants that we grew up. If it wasn't their music, it was their films, it was their fashion. I mean, Harry was a beautiful man. Style. And just, I mean, look, I'd interviewed them both, but I didn't know them. When they passed, it was like a part of me. I couldn't explain it. People at work were saying to me, why are you upset? You only interviewed him once. But they're parts of our history, and they come with a lot of what is in this book. Harry was very, very close to Martin Luther King.
Oh, I mean, you see those archival photographs of these stylish, elegant, sophisticated Black men at the protest, raising their hands, using the platforms that they had, which was so rare, and that they could just do it with this grace. And you think of how much hard work that took. And when I was younger, I mean, my mother, her crush on Sidney Poitier was real, okay? And so I would watch these movies with her and she would, that is a fine man and elegant and classy and, you know, and just beautiful. And that the way they loved each other. You know, when you see them say brother, they meant that. Julian Bond, all of those brothers. And then that grief, You know, when
Yes.
Harry Belafonte died, I was crying.
I was very upset.
When Cicely Tyson passed away, woo! I was at that funeral like, okay, something has happened. You know, when you think of a singer like Tina Turner in the 50s,
That upset me.
I cried because there is a grief. We're raised by them. You know, they taught us so much, and we have the blueprint.
When Tina passed, I just tweeted, "Did you ever think someone was going to live forever?" And it went crazy. It went absolutely crazy. Okay, the promise. Let's talk about Ezra and Cynthia.
Yes.
I get the impression that this is more of Cynthia's voice coming through.
Yes.
Cynthia is telling the story. The promise itself, if I was going to generalise it, and there's a lot in here, so I'm really generalising this. Cynthia and Ezra's parents were living at a time when they were one of two black families in a village.
Yes.
So that in itself must have had its challenges. Cynthia, their father, had a very good job. So at the time of civil rights, for a black man to be in management, that must have been a struggle. However, as parents, they wanted their children to believe the sun was always shining, the stars were always going to glisten, everything is going to be all right. And I get the impression, if I'm going to generalise, that was their promise.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always work out that way, does it? Let's go through some of the tests and struggles first.
Well, I think, you know, speaking in a general way, when you think about relationships with parents and children, you know, if you're the child, your parents promise you that they're going to take care of you,
And they can fly.
that they can do everything, and that you're safe, and that you're loved, and that, you know, everything's going to be okay, right? And if you are that parent, you're making these promises, and you're making sacrifices that your children may or may not be aware of, and you hope that you can give them even one thing of the things that you dream for them, right? And so for Cynthia and her sister, their parents are saying, education, education, you're not down in the South, you're here. We left the South so that you could have a different experience. But at that time, in America, the racial hostility was everywhere.
Yeah.
And they're kind of hiding away, almost thinking, you know, if it doesn't arrive here, we can keep these children safe. And they're coming from parents, particularly Cynthia's father, who he's carrying the trauma of his great-grandparents being burned alive in a church that they built. And so there's a trauma in the family where they're trying to avoid that for their daughters, but in the same way, it twists back on them. What happens?
It's really interesting because I think as parents, I can remember saying, you know, I don't want my daughters to go through what I went through. I want them to have what I had, the best of and more. And I think sometimes when we try to engineer those things, we can take our foot off of the pedal of reality.
Yes.
Because whilst Ezra and Cynthia's parents are engineering that, and they are working very hard, you talk very much about food. I get the impression that they were quite middle class, if that's the right term. So they weren't just eating chitlins. They were eating chitlins, but they were having lobster, and they were having, you know, their table was laden. Whilst trying to concentrate on that, along comes at the side the reality of the world that they're really living in.
Yes. I mean, I think one of the contradictions for Cynthia's family is that they kind of have, you know, somewhat of a middle class upbringing in a working class sea village, right? So you have the white people in the village kind of looking, he's up at this school, he's in a position of authority, he's teaching, but they still see them as black people. But in some ways, because of the access to having to be able to pay bills and keep the lights on and things like that, they lose access to black traditions that they need to hold them and to support them and to love them and to give them hope. And so they're almost suspicious of other black people, but they're just literally not around. And when I was younger and I was in school and I was up in this northern part of America, I would look around and think, what would it be like for someone who looks like me to grow up in this environment? What would that really mean if there's only one other Black family nearby and that's it, right? When you think of that in the 1950s, it would have been staggering. Yeah.
They would have, I'm assuming almost been labelled as sellouts, the parents?
I think so, in a way. You know, they don't trust religion because, of course, he's coming from a background where this thing happened in the church.
Absolutely.
So I don't want that religion stuff. And at the same time, there's moments in the novel where they go nearby to a slightly larger town because they think, well, maybe the children should have it.
From a cultural perspective.
Yes, and the other Black family, the Junkets who are in the novel, they are blackety black, okay? They go to church, you know, they're gonna have the chitlins, but they're gonna have the shrimp. They have machetes on the wall because they have a Caribbean influence too. So that father is willing to tell, like, the police in the village, I'm armed too. Try me and see what happens. And so there's a real dynamic with that, where at the end, those families come together and they have to defy everything to save these girls. Yeah.
In terms of the activities of the time, of civil rights time, the lynching of Black people, the treatment of Black people, how did you feel while you were writing this book? And I know this book took you about 7 years to write. You're writing stories from the 60s, but some of these stories are reflecting current day. How did you feel writing about that? Because there are messages here that I'm telling my children, that my mum's told me, that her mum's told her. And, you know, we need these messages, we need these books. But if history keeps repeating itself, how do you feel writing these stories?
You know, Angie, it's just so awful it's awful, it's disappointing, it's angering. You know, the story of Promise and the things that are happening to Black people in it, you know, when I was writing different scenes and things, I would have to stand up and just cry sometimes. I would be sobbing. The church scene, it took me so many days because I didn't want to write that. And I also wanted to be mindful, like, I don't want to write just a traumatic book about bad things that happen to Black people because that's not my experience of how I was raised, to celebrate and to have pride. But at the same time, I know the minimal things I've written in this book, there's no comparison to what Black people have survived, have prevailed, but also the things that feel immediate. It's a historical novel, but it's contemporary. The themes about police brutality, that's everywhere in America, that's here in France, that's here in the UK. It's global. This kind of systemic and pervasive racism and violence toward Black people and Black bodies. So, you know, the way that Black women are often treated as mules or labor, transactional ways about Black womanhood, that's still going on, and it's awful. And so, you know, working on this book and the themes in it, it wasn't like, oh, this was a long time ago. We are right back in a moment where there are fires everywhere. And that theme of fire in the book, you know, but then you think of James Baldwin, the fire next time, you know, so there's agency. These are not passive Black people where everything just happens to them. They have agency, they have voices, and they go forward. And I know I am deeply grateful for the shoulders that I stand on, that I can sit here, the two of us today. We're here because of a greater vision of ancestors and people who got out and said no. You
know, before we started rolling, I was saying to you, there's a saying from, I think it's Einstein, but doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, is madness. When you think about some of the stories that you've got in this book, these historical stories that keep going, they keep repeating themselves over and over again, but we're here and we're strong and we're seeing it through. How do you attribute that strength?
Well, I do think that we've been given models and stories, I won't say models, but stories and voices, and that we can visibly connect to and spiritually connect to people who forged paths ahead of us.
Yeah.
And I think that's really critical to thinking about how to go forward. Where do you look? You know, where do you look to think, how can I bear this? How can I tell my truth? Why does anything I do matter? You know, and you have to look at the past, but you also too have to look at the younger generations. I am so impressed about Black people now doing things, saying no, saying we need to rest.
Yeah.
You can't work us to death. We can't, you know, we can't function like this. We have a right to have our inner lives. We have a right to do things. So, you know, I also feel we also have to look at what's being repeated and break out of that too.
Break that cycle.
Break out of it,
Absolutely.
you know. It's hard to say, yes, we can stand in the church, or yes, we can protest, but we also have to start to really, what else? There has to be another place of oxygen. There has to be another kind of thing that's happening. Otherwise, the wheel keeps going. Yeah. But then it's like, whose wheel is that? That's not Black people's wheel. That's white supremacy. That's, you know, different politics, things in the justice system that just say, oh, we're just going to offer prayers, right? There has to be a moment where you're like,
in the wheel,
and when you think of someone like Malcolm X, who was like, you know what, I got something, you know, or offered this other way, but that you don't have to also be polarizing and say, oh, there's just this way Black people can be, or this is the one that we approve of, or this or that. It's such a different kind of time right now where I think some of the things we would have looked at in the past, we said, well, we're not criticizing that, but this is a very, very different time. And so it's different measures that have to be taken into account for our times and what we need, you know? Otherwise, certain systems and institutions can just say, we're just going to roll you over into your grave. And, you know.
One of the things, well, many of the things that we can claim, even in the midst of our pain, even in the midst of our anger and history repeating itself, we're survivors.
Yes.
We will cook up some food, we will dance, we will make music. Yes. And I'm just wondering about the music at the time of you writing this book. I'm really, really interested in this. And I also, if you don't mind, I'd like to touch on your mother as well.
Yes.
Because she is the heartbeat of this book. Let's talk about some of the music at the time. You mentioned earlier the Supremes and Berry Gordy.
Yes, yes, absolutely. You know, growing up in my home, you know, food and music, we would have dance parties in the kitchen, you know, we would be cooking and then my mom would be like, oh, that's my song, turn that up. You know, it's Stevie Wonder, it's just all of this music surrounding you. And I love in Stevie Wonder in his song As, and he says, do you know you're loved by somebody? And I could look around and be like, I'm loved, you know, it's so great. And then you had things like my parents, we went to the Soul Train, and we, you know, the Soul Train line is just epic, you know, where you're dancing together, you're at the family reunion, the plates, go get you a plate, fix somebody's plate. Here's the thing, when people are grieving, you bring them food, you take care of them. When children are born, you make food. And so I'm a very good cook. I'm going to brag here because my mother also, you know, there's a moment in the novel where, you know, there's a scene where, you know, you need to be able to feed yourself and nurture yourself, you know, to give yourself some sweetness. And so sometimes when I really miss my mother, I'm in the kitchen. I have her cookbooks. I'm looking at where her hands were touching the paper, where she must have had some flour or some sauce, and she was making something for me to eat, and my siblings and my father. And so I wanted that to be in the book as another way to say, there's Black joy here. This isn't these Black people just waiting for white people to do things to them, or for them to just forget who they are. But, you know, cooking food is one of the most beautiful things that people can share with each other. And I just love, you know, in America, different parts of the country you can go to, you got gumbo, you know, you have chitlins, you have greens, you have beautiful new kinds of stews and vegan foods. Like, Black people will be creative on something like what a Black person is going to do with a beet. You'd be like, wait, what? How is this possible?
A stew that somebody cooks and puts peaches or something in it? And so, and I'm thinking, no, but I can imagine the texture of the beef or the meat, and then the sweetness of that peach. You know, there's something about food. And as you're talking, I remember, I mean, my mum still to this day, I will go in the kitchen with her and I will measure. I'll get the scale out and I will measure. She's just putting it in.
That's me.
And for some reason, and I'm like, Mom, hold back, girl.
Right.
And
turn the music up. We're just going to put this in the pot and we're going to put this in. Sometimes people ask me for recipes or how did you make that? I don't know. And it won't be the same time the same thing when I make it, but it's going to be good.
Yeah.
You're going to be like, I need a plate to take home with me.
So we show love through food as well, don't we? Mm-hmm. And sometimes food is the silent conversation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Sometimes you don't even need to speak or say what you need, and so you're sitting there and someone will just quietly set out something for you and you look up at them and you've been seen, you know, and that is something I think is so beautiful and that won't change. Like, made something for you, or just bringing someone a cup of tea, or you made them something beautiful and you just set it down. And that's the language that you are offering to hold that person and say, I recognize whatever you're experiencing. We don't even have to talk about it because this is the way that I want to reach you. I think that's profound. Yeah.
I just want to very quickly tap on the dynamic between Cynthia and Ezra, because this is really the voice of Cynthia. Was there a dynamic that I'm not picking up on? Was Cynthia a bit more dominant? Was Cynthia a bit bossy?
Well, Cynthia is very bossy. Ezra is probably bossier.
Okay.
So they're 13-year-old and 15-year-old. And so Cynthia is younger, but she's kind of a wise soul. She kind of looks around. It seems like almost that kind of child you meet and you think you've been here before. Or they're sitting at the grown-ups table and you say, this is for grown folks. Why are you sitting here? And they're just watching everything. Ezra is very impulsive, where Cynthia will be like, I'm going to tell Mom, or we shouldn't be doing this. And Ezra's like, we're doing this. And if you tell Mom, you won't get to do this again with me, you know? Ezra keeps her feelings kind of inside, where, you know, and Cynthia wants to be like her big sister. And there's moments where they're protective of each other, but then they can fight with each other, you know, as sisters do. And there's, you know, there's this moment, and I was just thinking about something you said before. There's the moment between the sisters that was really beautiful, but also hard for me to write, where the sisters are being separated from each other. They don't know when or if they'll ever see each other again.
And do you know what that reminded me of? What film? Colour Purple.
Yes.
Took me right back. Took me right back.
I love Alice.
Alice Walker. I mean, I would say she's a writer who raised me. And Ezra says to her sister, you know, don't love your pain. You know, the world promises us harm and there's nothing we can do about that. But she says, promise me you'll have the nerve to love your life. And I just, you know, these sisters, I have a baby sister. I adore her. And she's my best friend. I call her all the time. We talk 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day. We'll pick up the phone and we don't even say, I know who it is. She'll be like, girl, did you see? And I'll be like, And then we're just on the phone. But I would do pretty much anything for her. She's my ride or die, you know? And so I love that I was able to bring some of that love into the book, and then chosen sisters in my life, chosen women who have raised me. But yeah, they kind of are each other's half in different ways, whereas Cynthia admires things that Ezra does, and at the same time, she knows when Ezra will take it too far. And so they have a very complicated dynamic.
Yeah. Can we talk about Mom?
Yes.
When you started the book, was it with Mum in mind?
You know, I think she was present, but it was really Cynthia's voice that I heard, grieving about the loss of her mother, that she was motherless, and at the same time telling herself, no, I had a mother. She may not be in this dimension, but I had a mother, and here's what happened.
Yeah.
And, you know, the mother, Cynthia's mother and Ezra's mother in this novel, you know, she has this background where she's raised in a convent, you know, where you think again of she's isolated, she has no Black people around her. She's been abandoned by her own mother, kind of left on the doorstep. And so then how does she know how to mother these girls?
Absolutely.
Where does she get that from? And she is fiercely protective of her daughters, and she wants to have friendships with them, but at the same time, she's like, you know, my mother would say to me, I am not one of your little friends. I'm your mother.
I'm your mother.
I'm your mother.
Yeah. Your friends are your friends. Your parents are your
I'm
parents.
not here to be your friend. I'm here to guide you
Nurture.
and protect
Yeah.
you and nurture
Yeah.
you and love you and like you, but I'm your mother. And she really valued that relationship. And, you know, toward the end of the story, before she is about to pass, she says, you know, I raised my daughters. Like, I know that I did my work here, which was to love these girls and to protect them is, you know, the best that I could. And I always remember my mother toward the end of her life telling me I did the best that I could do. And that just, you know, I hear that all the time. And I carry that with me, and I'm so thankful that my mother did the best that she
Could.
And
because
verbalized
that
it
was
to you.
amazing. And
Yeah.
she told me,
Yeah.
I don't have to guess, I don't have to think.
did. My mom, oh, she loved me. She's here. So
Yeah.
Eliza, will you put a soundtrack together with this book?
I kind of have a playlist
right.
that's circulating where there's current songs, there's songs from that time period, there's some Nina Simone, who I love, High Priestess, Abby Lincoln, but then, you know, Amy Winehouse, Beyonce and Riri, like all of that, Andra Day, you know, bringing all of these women, it's a lineage, you know, the voices, Marvin Gaye, just the different soulful things that, you know, connect it from this, like the history that still we're holding on to, you know. I'm just thinking of so many groups that my mother loved, but then, you know, you put on the oldies or Motown wherever you are in the world, and
There's a
people say
reaction.
they don't make songs like this, you know, what's love got to do with it? You know, you put that on, and you know, you're able to like kind of go through your day or your moment. You know, you put some Aretha Franklin on, hey, Dionne Warwick. Oh my gosh, my mother loves some Miss Dionne Warwick. So, you know, that's also a language that is always there for us. And I look around, Jasmine Sullivan, you know, oh my gosh, India Ari, you know, and then Beyonce and Cardi and Megan Thee Stallion, it's all together, you know, Lizzo, come on, you know, and they say, I love me some me, Eartha Kitt, oh, goddess.
Remember her?
Yeah, she said no compromise, you know. There's just so much. And so I'm always playing this music. It's going on, and I'm grateful for it. It's a whole literature for us.
And it ties very much in with the book. So, The Promise. Rachel Eliza Griffiths, but Eliza Griffiths. It encompasses memories, experiences that some are painful, but we come through them.
Yeah.
Food, love, music, but I think strength and richness.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Angie.
you.
This has been beautiful. Oh my gosh, so much admiration and gratitude for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bless up, sister. Yeah.